Hello and good morning. Thank you for joining our webinar today, focusing on Windows 10 migrations with Ivanti. I'm Danielle Chapman. I work in the marketing team here at Bytes, and I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Hirth from Ivanti, who will be presenting the webinar today. I'm also joined by Jeff, our Ivanti specialist at Bytes, who will briefly talk about the relationship between Ivanti and Bytes and Windows 7 now being end of support.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, Jeff Clemmo, Ivanti specialist here at Bytes, and today we're going to talk about Windows 7 going end of support, as you say, and what we're going to do about it. So Bytes has sold over 1 million Windows 10 licenses to date, which is great. That's the easy part. The difficult part is migrating these users from Windows 7 to 10 in an efficient and effective manner with good user acceptance. That's no small feat for an organization of only a few hundred users, let alone the tens of thousands that we work with on a regular basis. I'm sure you're aware of this, and that's why you're here today. So according to various analysts, and you can see on the right hand side of your slide there, Windows 7 still comprises around 30% of the Microsoft operating system usage out there. So there's a lot of users still on Windows 7, and that mirrors what we see here at Bytes. As of January 14th, this is now unsupported and unpatched. So that's a security concern. And unless you want to pay for extended security updates, rough cost, which you can see on the left-hand side of your screen there. So this depends on which Microsoft licensing package you're on, but it's not cheap. So I'm not sure if it's confirmed yet, but moving forwards, these costs are probably going to double for next year, and then double again the year after. So that's a concern. So essentially, we need to migrate these users to Windows 10, and ideally sooner rather than later. Now, one way of doing this is professional services consulting engagement. We can send in engineers, and they can use various proprietary tools to upgrade users kind of one at a time, USBs, etc. This can be disruptive. It can work, but then what about once you're on Windows 10? So unlike Windows 7, the release schedules are actually quite major and quite disruptive. So it's something between a service pack and a whole new operating system release, moving from Windows 10 releases to Windows 10 releases. So it's quite considerable every time. So this potentially means getting consultants back in every time you're upgrading to the next version of Windows 10. So what we'd rather do is give you the tools to manage your migrations in-house. And of course, we can bolster this with training and support to get you up and running in the first place. This means that when future Windows 10 releases come out, you can predictably and repeatably roll out these updates to your users in a non-disruptive fashion, maintaining that look and feel of Windows 7 and indeed 10 that they know and love, or well, at least maybe not love, but they'll certainly complain extensively about it if they get their laptop back without that picture of the dog on their desktop background. So Bytes is an Ivanti top-tier platinum partner. They're our migration technology go-to-market choice because of the best-of-breed heritage of some of the tools they use, AppSense, Shavlik, and Landes, some of which you may have heard of and used in the past. So Joe from Ivanti is going to tell us how using some of these tools we can empower you to take control of your Windows 7 migration and keep Windows 10 updated and patched moving forwards. So over to you now, Joe. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So yeah, I'm Joe Hirth, one of the Ivanti pre-sales guys who looks after kind of West EMEA region. So obviously where Bytes are based, and yeah, all that side of Europe really. Just quickly go through an agenda here with you guys. I guess it's fairly obvious why you're here. We've got the Windows 10 migration story that's very prevalent in the market at the moment. Lots of Windows 7 still out there. So yeah, it's going to take you through understanding a little bit around that Microsoft Windows lifecycle, where we've come from, what it's going to look like for the future. We're going to move into securing your existing Windows 7. So there's many reasons why you might actually need to keep Windows 7 or part of your environment on Windows 7. We're then going to talk about the discovery and environment assessment. So making sure that you're actually ready and selecting the correct devices for migration. We're then going to talk about replacing, reimaging, or upgrading those devices. Sort of running through the whole theme of the webinar will be end user downtime and productivity loss during and after a migration. So that's going to be covered off, and you can hopefully see how we're able to kind of seamlessly help with that migration and securing of those devices in order to give a good user experience as well. Finally, right at the end, I'm just going to show you a little bit around how we integrate with Microsoft's Autopilot as well. There is some new features from us that basically mean we're able to kind of automatically piggyback onto Microsoft's Autopilot. So if that's something you're using or is something which you're thinking about in the future, Azure Active Directory, etc., then we're able to help there as well and actually give you a little bit more management across that. So with that in mind, let's move on. So we've got the deadline, as you probably all have heard. It's I even heard it on the radio. And yeah, Windows 7 is end of life. So January the 14th was the point in time when Microsoft said that we've had enough. We're not going to release any more updates unless you pay us loads of money. So pretty much kind of get up to speed with Windows 10. That's where they want you to be, and they're kind of forcing everyone down that route. If we just take a little look on the right hand side there, we've got end of service. Now this is a new terminology from Microsoft because I'm guessing they can't really say end of life because all these versions of Windows 10 are still called Windows 10, and then with a numerical number after it, which kind of denotes the actual time it was released during that year. We can see these are already the versions of Windows 10 which have been end of service. Just an example there, the very most recent one was 1803. That was actually general release on the 30th of April 2018. So you can see the time scales are much more aggressive. We've got, you know, Microsoft kind of pushing through. There's different versions, so these aren't set in stone dates. So for example, we've got Enterprise and Education editions. They will be serviced 30 months maximum, assuming that you use the September edition. So typically the 09 one. And you've got Home and Pro editions, and they're going to be serviced for around about 18 months, no matter what version you go for, whether that's kind of like around the March release or the September release there. So pretty much in a nutshell, you've got 18 to 30 months maximum between these versions of Windows 10 going end of service. Much more aggressive timescales than the old Windows 7. So let's have a look at some of the challenges of migration. Just going to set the scene here. This is a quote from Forrester. You know, today's workspace is a hybrid of technologies, and we're in a constant state of migration. So pretty much what they're saying there is actually you're not going to have the operating system set in stone for those 10 sort of years that we had before. I mean, XP was around for 10 years before it went end of life. Windows 7, we're talking sort of 7 to 9 years. Windows 10, as I say, 30 months maximum. Most businesses will actually be on the 18-month schedule with professional versions. So much more aggressive. Let's have a look at some of the reasons why maybe you can't migrate. So this is some of the, you know, out in the field, some of the things which I've heard of when I'm talking to customers directly. You know, we've got things like we hear legacy apps are preventing us from going to Windows 10. Maybe my hardware is not compatible for running Windows 10. You know, it's a more feature rich, it's a more graphical kind of user interface. That's going to consume more hardware. You know, what's that user experience going to be like if we actually try and push Windows 10 out to these old devices? Is it going to, you know, crumble? Maybe you just got too many endpoints and you don't have a tool or, you know, just a way of getting it out there. So you might find the traditional methods of sort of running around with a USB stick, trying to upgrade everything. It's just not going to cut it because there's too many endpoints. You're just never going to be able to get on top of it. You know, it might take you 18 to 30 months to sort of do the rollout, and then you find that actually you've got to stop it again with the newer versions of Windows 10. You might also say that, you know, the timelines are just too strict. There's no automation, got no ability to do it, and therefore, yeah, I just can't keep up with the timescale of the cadence. So we understand that, and we say, okay, so why don't we secure what you've got? So, you know, I don't know if you guys noticed, but on Jeff's slide there was actually Windows XP as well still out there in the environment. There's reasons why, as we say, applications might be a reason why we can't migrate off, poorly coded applications typically, but we've got to have a think about, securing that. If that is the worst case scenario, we do need to keep that operating system in our environment, then let's secure it. And what we've got here is what we call ISEC, which is Ivanti's application control and patch management solution. So you hear me talk about ISEC a bit more, that's the terminology. Just quickly, the sort of main points to note are that we can sort of prevent those zero-day threat attacks. If you're the first customer to get attacked, then effectively you are a zero-day customer. Typically, we see that quite a lot. There's so many different variations of viruses and ransomware that the chances that you are the first person to see it is quite high. And things like antivirus are only going to be able to treat the things which are already known because they work off of a list of known vulnerabilities. So we've got ransomware and virus protection in there as well. That's kind of the same thing as inherently kind of blocking that at the same point as the zero-day protection stuff. We've then got Windows privilege management built into here. So Windows privilege management is hitting the middle ground between your admin users and your non-admin users. So I'll talk about this a bit more in a moment, but Windows, basically, you're either an admin or you're not. Admins can do everything and standard users can pretty much do nothing. So we find that users actually need typically something in the middle. This tool will help you kind of carve that bit out and determine what parts of the operating system you want to allow your users to be able to kind of play around with, if you like, and which parts you really want to block. We've then got application whitelisting and blacklisting, pretty much as it says on the tin, allowing and denying applications based on a list. And then finally, we've got Microsoft and third-party patching built in here as well. So this is talking about, your Microsoft vulnerabilities as well as your third-party ones. And typically, you'll find that most vulnerabilities sit within the third-party software solutions, like your Javas, your QuickTimes, your Adobe's, all those kind of things. And that's all built in as well. So we have a full catalog and your single patching solution there, which means you can do it all from one console. So let's take a little look at this tool in a bit more detail. So patching. If you look at the top of the screen there, we've got a nice easy way to see how patched your machines are. Nice bars there going across. You can see, am I patched? How patched am I? You can then highlight a machine. If you highlight a machine, the sort of middle part of that console is then showing you which patches are installed and not installed for that particular machine. And then you can take it one step further and drill in again by highlighting a patch. And then at the bottom of the screen there, you can see under the summary that we've got the information, and that is direct from the vendor. So, Microsoft in this example, that's all from their website. That's exactly the patch detail specific to that machine and that vendor. As I mentioned, privilege management. Let's have a little look at how we do that. So we can actually take applications. I've just used zebra.exe here. It's a name badge creator type application. It's typically really badly written, and it actually needs admin rights just to launch it. We see these applications all the time in the wild, and typically in this scenario, you would have given your user a admin access to the entire PC just in order for them to be productive and able to sort of do their job. But with that, inherently, you're bringing a lot of security risk as well. We've got the ability to install programs, accidentally execute viruses, kind of really screw the operating system up. But you've given them access in order to do their job. What we can do here is we can actually say, just that application, I just want that application to be running as admin. Everything else, just leave the user on a standard privilege. We've got the components section. Now, best way to think about this is all the kind of items that you generally see in control panel. So you've got add and remove programs, add hardware, etc. You can tick these boxes and you can either elevate or de-elevate users specific to these components. So you might have an admin user and you actually want to de-elevate their ability to uninstall a program or add or remove programs, and you can do that here. We've got a self-elevation option, and then it can work off the list in the bottom there. We can say, okay, so only apply self-elevation to the items in the list, or apply self-elevation to all items other than those in the list. So you might have some users that actually need, might be part of this rollout. You might be auditing. Every time that a user uses self-elevation, it is audited and logged, but the difference being that the user has to consciously right-click and elevate it themselves. So a little bit of a mindset thing there. The user's conscious that they're doing it and they're going to be logged, but maybe you don't want to stop their productivity straight away. You just want to get a bit of an idea of what users are doing out there. That's how you do that. Then finally, we've got the system controls. You can see here that we've got uninstall control items, service control items, and event log items as well. All of these things can be built in and elevated or de-elevated. So, for example, you might want to specifically say that there's a certain product which you don't want anyone to be able to uninstall. You can list that here. Certain service item that you don't want anyone playing around with, or maybe you do. So in my example, you can see that the principal are there. I'm allowing everyone, even my standard users, to basically go in and restart the principal of service. It's a great example if someone's working from home and they can't get their printer to work. It might just be a case of restarting the principal of service. Moving on to our trusted ownership model. Now, this kind of comes under the application control banner. This is our sort of primary catch-all rule, if you like, before you go down the route of whitelisting and blacklisting. This is our method that we use in order to it's a lightweight management, stops users from being able to run things which basically they bring into the operating system. So let's just assume that on every system there's certain accounts that are trusted to introduce software. Typically that might be system, local administrator, trusted installer, and an admin group. You could also have things like CCM and AppV, depending on how you deliver those applications. This is a fundamental security model for Windows operating systems. It uses NTFS security to determine whether or not they're trusted or not. So typically, if a file is not owned by one of those above on those bullet points, it will not be allowed to run. It's as simple as that. So just taking a quick example here, this is our trusted ownership box built into our software. You can add and remove these, but typically we find that out of the box this is pretty good. So you can see there we've got system administrators, local administrator, and then trusted installer. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to have a look at just notepad.exe, typical built-in application, and you can see here that the ownership is trusted installer. And we look down here and we've got trusted installer, and therefore that application is going to run absolutely fine. We then look at another application. So we've got Dropbox here. It's owned by Joe. Now Joe is not on this list over here on the left-hand side. He's not explicitly listed, and therefore what you'll find is that that particular application is denied. It's really good for Dropbox and Chrome as well. Typically you can install these into your user's profile without admin rights, and users can actually kind of be shipping your data, if you like, outside of your environment without even you knowing. So as I say, the application control part has two parts, the trusted ownership and then the executable control part. So let's say that the trusted ownership model, that's our catch one, but actually it's not, specific enough to really target individual applications or specific use cases. So then we can take it to just kind of rule number two, if you like. And that is to actually then we can deny specific applications and we can allow specific applications as well. We've got here in this example Visio and Project, and actually we can go a step further and use this for things like license control, because these are device-based licenses typically. We can actually use this tool to block those applications and therefore not needing a license for those devices as well. We can specifically allow individual device applications as well over and above our trusted ownership model. So you might have something which is causing you hassle, trusted ownership is catching it, but you don't necessarily want it to. and there you can allow it and stop that from being an issue as well. We've got folder and drive rules as well, just to give it a little bit extra control there. So you can maybe allow a whole folder or a whole drive if there's a lot of information or something which is on a shared drive that you want people to have access to, but you've kind of blocked it inherently in your rule set. So moving back onto that Windows 10 migration piece. Let's say now that you've secured your environment for those devices which are unable to be migrated. We're now going to talk about actually how to migrate those devices that you do want. So typically there's 5 main technical steps for any migration. Let's break the operating system down and your Windows 7 into these 5 parts. We've got the operating system, we've got the drivers, the applications, files, and the profile. I generally like to add a 6th, which is to make this reusable, because with these newer kind of updates and things which are coming out, you might find that you need to do these more often than you did before, given the cadence of these release dates. That being said, we need to make sure that this process is going to be repeatable so that we can do it over and over again, as and when Microsoft decides that they're going to upgrade to a new operating system. So let's talk about these basic steps. 5 successful steps for a successful migration. Number 1 is the discovery phase. So first of all, we need to find out what's out there. You can't do anything until you know what you've got on your environment. Next is centralization. That's all about getting that user's persona, all of their data, everything off of that endpoint into a central location, so that that endpoint sort of becomes, you can wipe it without that data being stuck on there and that being the only place it is. We then have a look at the assessment. So we need to decide what to do with those devices found from the discovery phase, whether that is to manage them or to migrate them. Then we've got the deployment step, the danger step, I like to call it. If 3 previous steps have been done correctly, then IT shouldn't be so nervous about actually deploying. And then probably the most important step, we're seeing this more and more now, user acceptance is really high on the CEO and kind of top level staff for success criteria. User acceptance is right up there. For a proper migration, we should always achieve a high level of user acceptance. And when we refer to proper, I mean, including all of their applications, their profile, their files and folders, and not just a blank operating system like it's just been bought from PC World and kind of just given to the user. So that's not really a migration, that's just a new operating system. So let's break those steps down again a bit further and talk about how we actually do these phases. So we've got discovery. A huge issue with any migration is knowing what you've got on your network, let alone finding those which are suitable for upgrading. Here we're talking about Ivanti's endpoint manager. We're able to discover all the devices on the network using our unique methods of ARP broadcasting. That said, we can see here that this is just an example of my environment at home. We can see loads of devices there, things which I actually didn't even realize I had on my device, on my network, sorry. These all get brought into this console, and then we can start looking at them and deciding whether or not we want to manage them. That's centralization. Capturing the user's settings and files. So over time, users' desktops will become, kind of bloated, and there'll be lots of information on there. There's also lots of stuff which you do want to capture. So let's just take an example here. We've got users' fonts. That's something which quite a lot of users will change once and then kind of forget about them. But when you take that away, it's really affecting. Email signatures, again, something which a user configures. Might have been, once every few years, but take it away, give them a blank one back, they're not going to be happy, and it's going to take them a long time and a loss of productivity in order to get that back to what it was before. And typically, files and folders saved all over the desktop. You've had this system for 7 to 10 years. It's probably going to look a little bit like this, even if it's not as bad as that on the desktop. You will have files and folders all over the place, which those users probably do still need. Let's talk about the assessment now. So we've got to select those devices which are suitable for upgrading to Windows 10. So what we can do here is we can run a query. It's going to get the highlighter. You might find that we're going to run a query which says the machine has to have at least 4 GB of RAM. The machine at the moment has to be running Windows 7. And in this particular example, I need at least 2 GB of hard drive space available in order to download that Windows 10 image. So here's our query. We're going to now run this against this bunch of machines. So there's all of our machines on our network on the right-hand side. Here's my query, saved in that corner. And then we're going to run that query, and it's going to return the machines which are suitable and hit that criteria that we have already specified. So, 4 GB of RAM, 2 GB free of hard drive space, and running Windows 7. And there we've now targeted just the machines which are suitable for upgrading. We can display those machines, if you like, on a dashboard. So we actually have the ability to not just bring in information from, let's say, our Windows 10 environment, but also other information such as where these machines are by location, maybe some information on warranty. And this is a tool that we have called extraction, and it basically pulls in information from various different databases, and you can display them on a drag and drop graph and a screen like this with all these different data sources. This information might be suitable, and you might find that it's useful during your Windows 10 migration, because things like location and warranty could play a big part in how you plan and execute that Windows 10 rollout. On to deployment. So we've now targeted those devices. We've got exactly the list that we want to actually deploy to. Now let's do that deployment. Everything we have is templated. So that typically includes things like partitioning the disk, deploying an image, installing drivers, joining the domain, and then installing some software. We are able to deploy a single Windows 10 image to multiple different types of hardware. So for example, you might capture an image from a Windows, HP Pavilion machine, but then you can use that same image to send to your Dell PCs and maybe your Lenovo PCs as well. The reason we can do that is we have something called hardware independent imaging, which basically means that we decouple the drivers from the operating system and kind of treat them as two separate parts. So that means that leaves IT with a lot less headache, and inherently Windows 10 is actually a lot better at managing drivers as well. So you'll find that that should help a lot with future rollouts. So how do you now want to deploy that? Do you want to give it an option for self-service? Do you want to push that? Or do you want to maybe schedule that for a time in the future? So here's our self-service model. So we've got a little console here. This is on the endpoint. That user can go and execute that as and when a time suitable for themselves. We can do it as a push. So we want to do that straight away. Or we can start that later, maybe in a certain time frame. It's important to note as well, you can do a combination of all three. So maybe you leave it as a self-service item for a few weeks. Then you decide that actually Friday, end of the month, is the last opportunity that you had to do it yourself. If not, that's going to be automatically upgraded by IT on that schedule. We then want to talk about some user acceptance. So providing that user with that seamless experience from their previous Windows 7 or Windows 8, remember you could be on Windows 8 as well. We don't see it as often, but the same applies whether it's from Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 8.1, or even Windows 10 to Windows 10, because that's kind of more relevant now actually. We're seeing lots more Windows 10 to 10 migrations. And here's that desktop in a Windows 10 environment, back to what they had for that last 9 years worth of use. I just want to show you now a summary of how this all works in a short video. So just so you get a bit of an idea what this looks like, and I'll talk over the top of this. Okay, so these are the products in question. So we've got Ivanti Endpoint Manager, File Director, and Environment Manager. So this user logs into their existing Windows 7 environment, like they have been for the last few years. Here's that desktop, which you can see. Files and folders all over the place, some drive maps, some printers mapped. Now this user is going to go into Outlook. The way that they've configured Outlook to launch these preview panes, all of these settings have been configured by the user during that time that they had their Windows 7 environment. We've got a non-Microsoft application here, such as Foxit Reader, and you'll have to be a bit quick, but the three up from the bottom, Show Start Page, has been unticked. So there's some configuration options here we've done. The user then sets their corporate font to their favorite, which in this case is Windings and size 72. Now, typically all of these parts of the operating system get saved and managed on the hard drive of this local PC. Now, this makes it a real pain to actually migrate this user because all of that information is local, and we have no real way built in order to get those settings off. Typical roaming profiles used to use versions. So Windows 7 had its own version, Windows 8 had its own version, and Windows 10's actually got version 5 and version 6 now. These aren't interoperable between each other. So now we're going to jump back into Endpoint Manager, and we're going to deploy some agents. So namely, that's going to be Environment Manager and File Director to the existing Windows 7 environment. Now, you don't have to do this. This is just if your Windows 7 is already running. We can do a lift and shift upgrade as a one-time thing. So EPM then reports back and says successful, that those agents have been deployed. Now that those agents are on that Windows 7 endpoint, that user logs back in and you can see that profile being imported. It's pretty silent though. There's not a lot of interaction from the user. They're back into their Windows 7 environment, but we can now see that that information has been pulled into that database and it's now centrally held. So we can see those customizations for those applications are in that database. We can use built-in reporting tools as well to see things like the migration status for that particular user. And that particular user, you can see there, is pretty much complete. And we can use these dashboard tools, which I showed you earlier, the extraction dashboard, to actually act as almost a ticker chart to say how many are ready, Windows 10, how many are not in scope, and how many are sort of on their way. In this particular example, this user is going to use the Selfservice catalog in order to deploy their Windows 10 image. So you can see there, we can add some screenshots. This is all completely customizable. You put things in there like how long it's going to take. That user decides to execute the Windows 10 migration at a time suitable for them. Maybe it's at lunchtime, they've got a few minutes spare. You can see here now that this same Windows 7 machine is now booting into what we call WinPE. This is a part of the operating system used for provisioning. And this template is now going to start running. So the template goes through the provisioning, goes through all that partitioning, drives, wiping stuff. Remember, at this point, it doesn't matter. We can wipe that drive because that profile and everything else has been pulled out of the operating system, and we're not stuck with that stuck on the local C drive anymore. I have to admit, it is sped up. It's not live, but it does take about 22 minutes to do it end to end, so it's not horrendous. That same user now logs into their Windows 10 environment using their same credentials as they did before. You can see that personalization has been applied. We're processing some policies as well. They're all processed in parallel, so much quicker than group policy. And only the right amount of profile is pulled down at logon. We can see that Windows 10 now with that same experience, that or the desktop as it was. Now Outlook's been upgraded, but that's okay. We can take settings from previous versions of applications, but we can see that the preview pane and all the layout is as it was before. The email signature is there as well. Let's just take a look in Foxit Reader again. 3 up from the bottom, show start page. That's still unticked, so that setting's come across. We can see here that here's Notepad. Let's have a look at the font. That's still set to our corporate standard of Windings 3, size 72. Those printers and scanners are all still mapped as well. And that is a quick summary of how we would do Windows 7 to Windows 10 migration and try and keep it as seamless as possible. Just a couple more bits that I want to mention. Now, this is the term modern device management, which Microsoft have been mentioning recently. It's typically just managing your kind of modern devices. So your Windows 10, your mobile, your laptops, desktops, tablets, Azure machines, etc. It's just managing them in a more simplified way. So moving away from the likes of group policy and on-premise Active Directory pretty much. Just a bit of a busy slide, but effectively what this is saying is that you can kind of go and purchase a machine from wherever, via whoever. You can give that to the user, and the user is going to log in with their credentials, their corporate credentials, and that's going to join that machine to your Azure Active Directory, and you're going to have control over it from there. Now, where we come along is that we're actually able to leverage that autopilot capability at the same time and actually link that same machine, not just to Active Directory Azure, but to our endpoint management solution as well. So we have full control over that device from Endpoint Manager. We can deploy software to it. We can remote control it. We can provision it for the future as well. We have full control over it. We can do inventory, everything, as you would a traditional device, but that device is actually sitting in Azure Active Directory, but it's also sitting in our console ready for control. So one more video. I'm just going to show you quickly what that looks like for a new PC for a user. You have to bear with this one a little bit. Your new Windows 10, so you've gone to PC World, you select your language and you select your keyboard. Really typical stuff that you just do right at the beginning of any brand new operating system. This is outside of Ivanti at the moment. This is completely blank Windows 10 machine. You typically have to go through this with any version of Windows 10, except the EULA. The first thing you now see is sign in with your Microsoft account. Now, what we're doing in this example is we're actually logging in with our corporate credentials. That's our corporate email address and our corporate password. We've got two-factor turned on in this scenario. So because of that, put in your domain credentials. The business has said you need to have two-factor turned on. We're just going to log in there. Now you can see that the Ivanti logo has now appeared. Now this is again outside, this is agentless. This is, at this point, we've recognized that Azure is linked to Endpoint Manager. And yes, we would like to enroll that device into Endpoint Manager so that we can manage it for the future, as well as seeing it in Active Directory. At this point, it goes back to its typical Windows 10 startup. This is where it's enrolling into all of these cloud services effectively. A little bit of work that goes on in the background. Now, as part of joining Endpoint Manager, we've said that we need to do some more security settings. And actually, we've said that we require a PIN to be set up as well. So we do that. We're all set, and that user can now get to their desktop, blank Windows 10 desktop. Now, just to prove that it's actually all working, we can see that we are connected to Azure Active Directory there. And it's managed by Endpoint Manager. It says LDMS, that was the old name of our product, so some of the stuff still says that. But if we just have a look in Endpoint Manager, we can see that desktop there is in our console, ready to be maintained. And at the bottom there, you can see it's signed in with corporate email address as well. So that's pretty much it, guys. Are there any questions for any of that stuff which we've seen so far?
Right, thank you for that, Joe. Yeah, I'm going to open it up now to any questions. If you do have any questions, then please feel free to submit them in the questions box. It's just at the right-hand side of your screen on the control panel. If you do have any questions you prefer to submit outside the webinar, then please email tellmemore@bytes.co.uk. So I'll just give it a sec to see if any questions come through. Okay, so we've had a question. Do we have to use Endpoint Manager or can we use SCCM in combination with the profile migration tool?
So absolutely, yeah, you can use SCCM. I'll send these slides out for reference, but one of the first steps of the Windows 10 migration bit, when I set those 5 steps up, we had the operating system, the drivers, the applications, the files and folders, and the profile. So effectively, you could use SCCM to do the first 3. You can use SCCM to do the deployment of the operating system, the drivers, and the applications. If you're invested in SCCM, of course, you're not asking us to chuck it away. You can leverage that, and then we can come along and we can actually help you with the files and folders, and we can help you with the profile as well. So between those tools, you can kind of split them up, and you can purchase them as such as well. So you can purchase them individually or as a bundle. So yeah, you can just pick the ones that you need basically. But yeah, totally, yeah, absolutely, you can use SCCM.
Brilliant, thank you, Joe. Also, where are the profiles stored?
So typically our profiles are actually stored in a SQL database. Don't get worried about that being massive. It's not like a Roman profile. We typically look at something like 30 megabytes roughly per user for a full profile, including all the Windows parts, all of the applications as well. The reason we store it in a SQL database is we have a lot more control over it. We can actually roll back parts of that profile as well. So you might have an example where Office corrupts. Instead of getting rid of the whole profile, you can actually go and remove just the Office part of that profile and leave 99% of the rest of the profile as it was. So that's why we have it in a SQL database for scalability as well.
Thank you, Joe. Also, we've had another question. We've not been able to migrate Outlook settings directly, across from 2016 to 365. The config files seem to be incompatible. How is Ivanti migrating these settings?
It's a good question, actually. I'll have to double check it. As far as I was aware, the last time I tested it, I've migrated settings from previous versions to 365 without a problem. Let's take this one offline. If we get that person to email us direct, then I will have a little look at specific settings which you're looking to migrate. But we're fairly customizable. So if there's stuff which isn't in our kind of template, let's say, we can individually specify, let's say, files, folders, and registry keys which we need to be migrated in order to get that consistency from previous versions to let's say 365 version. So we'll take them on offline. I'll have a little look at that, but it should be possible.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, Alex, we'll get back to you on that one. Okay, so another question, which bits are agent-based and which bits are agentless?
Okay, so typically most of this is agent-based. The bit right at the end was agentless, where the machine connects via autopilot into Endpoint Manager as well. The only thing is with agentless is it does lose quite a bit of functionality, so I would generally say that you do want the agent on there. The other parts, kind of a little bit outside of that, is the patching that I showed you very early on in the presentation. That is primarily agentless. So you can do patching agentless. You get that screenshot that I showed you with the red and green bars and all the information on the patches. That's all agentless. Application control part does have an agent, and the endpoint manager part and all the sort of migration part does have an agent as well. So yeah, that's kind of where we draw the line.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Joe. Also, is patching a separate product?
It's a separate product or it's the same product. It depends on how you purchase it. So Endpoint Manager has its own patching built in. We then have the ISEC, which I mentioned again very early on. That is its own product. So it depends if you want to go down the route of kind of just patching and application control, then you could just buy the standalone patching and application control. If you're going down the route of managing your endpoints and you're doing a migration, then I suggest you use the patching built into Endpoint Manager. And there's actually application control built into there as well, exactly the same product, just under that single console. So it depends on whether or not you need Endpoint Manager, I'd say. If you do, then use the built-in versions. If you just looking to do patching or just looking to do application control, I suggest you buy the individual products with their own consoles.
Okay, brilliant. So that's all the questions we have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join the webinar. I hope you found it valuable. And thanks to Joe and Jeff for presenting. As mentioned previously, please do complete the feedback form at the end if you can. I'll send you all a link to the webinar recording tomorrow. Thanks again and have a great day.